Another DraftScience video presentation. Okay, so I'll try some more reasoning. So the theme here is that conventional physics, whatever, the talking head physics, the current, I don't know, you don't even know what to call this thing. The physics they've been doing for the last 100 years, where they made up all this wooey stuff of everything being in places and not knowing where it is, and entangled and superimposed and goes everywhere but goes nowhere. All this bent space, wooey, time dimension crap. It's just crap. A horrible guess at the truth. And and the evidence, if you really look at it, the evidence doesn't point to it. Okay, as much as they try to say it's all proven and it's all we verified. No, it really hasn't been. They didn't repeat experiments. They made up experiments and they distorted the evidence all over the place. Just Pharaoh cell kind of gimmick tree everywhere. And the physicists are just terrible. I mean, they're just so lost in their religion. They just haven't looked at the real world at all. They haven't even taken a glance, and they haven't made any effort to avert their eyes from the Borg beacon and look around and see if there's an alternative reality out there. They're just so lost in their Sasquatch conspiracy theory. They're, whatever it is, made up mush. So anyway, Sabine Hossenfelder has made, these videos are just getting worse and worse. Was the universe made for us? This isn't a question anybody who has a serious brain even entertains. So why would it be a subject of one of her videos? Her videos are all on these abstract physics concepts that are insanely technical, most of them. The average person have no hope keeping up with her videos at all. And here she takes on this mush subject. It can't have any relevance to her audience at all. Can't mean anything to anybody with a brain, anybody who's thought about it for 10 seconds. I mean, this question is answered the opposite way. You just simply explain how evolution means we're made for the universe. That's all. Yes, there's a correlation between the way the universe is structured and the way we're structured, but the correlation is only because you can't evolve to an environment that doesn't exist. You evolve to the environment that does exist. So of course, life is compatible, with the universe, because it has to be. Duh. I mean, it's just too stupid a question. She takes 8 minutes and 46 seconds to explain that there's a concept called evolution, and that's what made us, and so we're therefore compliant with the facts of the universe, is because we couldn't exist for theoretically millions, hundreds of millions, if not billions of years. The DNA molecule couldn't have survived that long without being compliant to the rules. So anyway, this is too irrational. So anyway, then comments. Your people just don't want to, stay relevant to the subject I'm actually talking about in the videos, and the overall subject that you're completely missing. Okay, is that I've reduced this down to just 3 little videos. You have to 17-minute videos. One debunking the whole two-slit mystique. Just getting rid of all the need for any Heisenberg nonsense. We can't know all this. All that stuff just goes away. Superposition, entanglement, all of it doesn't. So completely unnecessary. It's the simplest pattern in the universe, and it's mechanically being created by a very simple process. And then I've explained to you how they have a formula, 1/2 mv squared to define energy, and it has absolutely nothing to do with anything rational. It's connected in no way to any hard or decent physics or science. It absolutely makes no sense. It has no evidence really supporting it. It's just some sort of silly babble that got stuck into physics, and they just decided to keep it. And it's nonsense. It's just an absolute nonsense. And yet it's a foundation of their physics. This is how they understand everything's energy. They sit there and use this formula. It's completely incorrect when they had a perfectly good one, MV. That worked just fine. MV. There you go. Mass velocity. That decides how much energy something has to have. And instead of staying with the simple thing, they decide to go with this silly thing. And it's just an example of how unreliable their physics is, how they haven't applied any scrutiny to it at all. That they've just accepted things as true. They've never really tested them. And, they're just, like I said, they just have no interest in seeing anything but a picture. If a picture doesn't have Sasquatch in it, they're not interested in looking at it. All right. And then in the third video is a simple explanation for gravity, where you don't need any of this wooey, bent stuff. You don't have time dimensions. You don't have to worry about any of that crap, because it's a simple mechanical process. So anyway, I've made this I've made a decisive hit on the cornerstones of all of their physics. Okay, I mean, I got 3 videos and there's 4 stones maybe, but I mean, I've blown them up. Okay, there's no foundation anymore for anything that they're thinking or doing. It's all just mush. And you can see that it's all mush because they don't, they don't even make oatmeal. They don't do anything real. Okay, they do things like, oh, we found gravitational wave. Well, who cares? We took a picture of a black hole. Who cares? Nothing real. So nothing's riding on this physics being right or wrong, except billions of dollars of money they waste on taking pictures of things nobody needs a picture of. So anyway, just so bad. And here you people just keep changing the subject. You always want to talk about something else. I mean, I made it so simple, you just can't do it. All right. So these 3 comments are sort of related, vaguely. Well, I'll read them in whatever order. Okay, so the first one is, how does this relate to the Northern Lights sprites, if at all? So this is a video just pointing out, mostly I was talking about electricity and how it has to travel through a conductor, the atmosphere. It has to turn the atmosphere into a conductor. Well, the Northern Lights are doing essentially the same thing. There's a whole bunch of particles. And the thing with the Northern Lights is it's cold. There's a lot less convection in the atmosphere. So the atmosphere is made out of clumps of stuff, in the same condition. Atoms that are moving a lot less too. And the radiation from the sun hits it, and because of the angle, it goes through an awful lot of it. More atmosphere again. And the more, you get effects, blah, blah, blah. And so it's just basically, creating a little subtle plasma that's producing lights, because you're changing ions. You're banging molecules into each other, and they're ionizing. And in the process of ionizing, the electrons are moving. And when the electrons move, you can make a photon. But a key to understanding photons, so this sort of relates to the next comment, but I don't know. I'll just throw it in there as a preface. The whole point of me debunking the two-slit experiment was really finding the insight. Okay, it reveals a fact about light. Okay, is this slit experiment? It sort of just reveals something really important to understand. Is that photons are composite objects, and they're also made in a composite fashion. So the idea is that the surfaces are creating the phenomenon by breaking photons. So if a photon was, let's just say, 4 of these things, you can just simplify this argument by saying, okay, 2 of them go in all kinds, every photon goes in a different direction, and all you're really relying on is that you end up with 2 bits being sent here, and then 2 bits are sent this longer distance, and they make up the rest of the photon. And so you just make a photon, you don't have a photon if it's out of phase, and then you do have it's in phase, blah, blah, blah. So you're just reconstructing a pattern. So in the space is a lot of these pieces, no doubt. Pieces are flying off every time there's some obstruction. There's pieces of photon. And no doubt surfaces are actually generating photons that are already pre-broken, you could argue. This thing. So the idea is that it sort of indicates, let's just say we have an indication that photons aren't created by single electrons. Like one electron doesn't just move, and now I've made a photon. What it does is it moves fast, and it compresses all the energy that would have been in that movement, and it compresses it into a smaller space as a reflection. And so that's a piece of the photon. And then another electron over here, okay, is doing the same thing. It juts out, it compresses energy into the space, all right, except it's at a different time. So I should have made this, so this one's moved on. While the electricity went up here, this photon moved on and it's here now. Okay, this little compression. So it's like this compression, okay, and this compression have a certain distance between them, and that's going to be the polarization. And that is what hits the surface. This is the first piece of the frequency, so it's 500 nanometers. This is the first 500 nanometer clump. All right, and then another one shows up 500 nanometers later, okay, this clump. But that clump is more than one photon, right? It has more than one little bit of energy in it. More than one little bit of energy. So every time a photon hits, it's really more than one photon in a sense. That's it's a packet of little energy here and a packet of energy here. And you have to look inside of that. So that's a composite inside the composite. So the composite pieces of the photon are themselves composite. And so when one photon hits, what's really hitting is, 3 photons. There's one, one here, and there's one here, let's say. And those are the clumps. This is a pair, this is a pair, this is a pair. So like 3 photons are hitting. So the idea of sending one photon is theoretically, impossible. Because you could argue, okay. I mean, this is, the facts really do indicate this, okay. So I'm just saying this isn't far from proven physics. It's not just speculation. I mean, we know this is a real phenomenon, that photons have polarization, so you have to account for it being produced over a large area. You can't make a photon from a single electron because its polarization is a million times too small. So you need you need 2 atoms to do something. You need 2 electrons in 2 different locations to make a photon, at least 2. What point did I want to make? Yeah, so they have this idea that you can just create a single photon. Well, obviously the point is no, you really can't, because every time you're creating one photon, there's probably other photons with it. Because the whole point is you're taking energy that's in space, moving in a direction. You're moving into it, and by moving into it, you're taking stuff this far apart and you're making it stuff this far apart. So you're making this, and again you're doing it someplace else, doing the same thing, this, and it's this that becomes the photon. And so each one of these is a pair. That's the photon. So that's exactly what I just drew, but I just drew it again just to emphasize it. But I really wanted to get to, so it's tied to the speed of electricity, and so, you just theoretically just can't produce something called one photon. I can't just energize something and say, just give me 1 photon. Because to make 1, I have to make maybe 4, or 3, or 7, or 10. Who knows how many at a time? It could be 20. So I can't help but make 20 photons when I'm attempting to make 1 photon. Because it is composite, and it is just made out of this simple process of electrons moving. Again, this thing, I mean, this is so fundamental to this whole physics, understanding what physics is, and understanding that everything's in an environment, and it's a fact. And when I move my hand towards the camera, I have produced more energy, in the sense that I have forced more energy to collect in front of my hand, essentially, and made it reflect energy into you. And if I move it away, it's disappearing. It's becoming transparent because there's less reflections off of it, because it's moving the same direction as the stuff that would reflect off of it. I mean, and that is just the key to creating this frequency stuff. And the frequency just really has to, the idea is when you hit a surface, what you're doing is you're stimulating an atom, with the first clump. So the first little group of clumps, clump, 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 right? They hit, dot, dot, dot. They create motion in the atoms. The atoms push their electrons into each other. This electron pushes into this electron, pushes into this electron. It does that at the same speed this happened. So the transmitter and the receiver are doing the same thing. They're timing a cycle, and then this next little group hits, okay, here, and it's hitting just as this is moving this way. This hits this way and creates that little bit of extra energy that says, okay, this is something. This is a photon now, because I've matched the frequency to the polarization. The distance between them, the distance between the clumps, this polarization is also going to represent this distance of when energy moves through the atoms and then another event takes place. It's now constructive. It's destructive if this is out of phase, that is, if your frequency's off or your distance is off, then obviously you could hit in front of that energy and destroy the energy that you've created. So, and if you're too far behind it, obviously that can't catch up to it. So it really is a timed cycle, and that's all you're really doing is saying, is the timing right? And if the timing's right, then I'm going to create a reciprocal event that'll be called a photon, a reflection or a transmission of the energy. It's always energy, but it's more significant as energy if it can tip the electron. That is, if it can hit the crystal of atoms and then cause the crystal to shoot a little electron down a pathway that ends up having it pop out of the surface, that kind of thing. There's a dynamic to it. But anyway, so this is what's sort of been demonstrated by this complete, it's in a complete change from what they are talking about. They'll say things like, a single electron can produce a photon. They don't have experiments demonstrating any of this stuff. They don't have experiments demonstrating the production of this single photon. And yet these are all things they've accepted as existing when they have no theory for how it's produced. None at all. No atomic theory, certainly. And, you should be suspect. And this should be kind of, this is what, eureka moment or something? There should be some recognition that this is a significant change. But again, then all you want to do is talk about other crap. Alright, so this other comment was just a kind of a Sean Carroll thing. He says there's a podcast called BBC Inside Science. The episode aired on, okay, so it's all this stuff. And he says this Adam Rutherford guy grilled him. Sean Key didn't grill him at all. So I don't know what you were listening to, but what I listened to doesn't sound anything like it. Sound like they're best buddies, and he's just totally falling for the whole bullshit, and Anyway, and so you say it's entertaining because Sean is obviously full of crap. Well, yeah, see, that's, to me, it's very frustrating and irritating. It's not entertaining at all to listen to some, douche, just talk all this crap as if they have a shred of real evidence to back any of this crap up. And especially when you get to many worlds, because that's just an example how anybody can invent a god. Anybody can invent some kind of Sasquatchian, UFOian, gremlin, pixie explanation. Obviously, somebody can do that very easily because they did it all throughout history. That's how we invented all the gods, and then we invented all the things like gremlins and pixies. These are all just the hobgoblins, trolls. People just invent these silly explanations for things. And this is, many worlds. It's just another desperate gremlin. It doesn't have anything to do with anything real or sensible or any of that. So it was just pretty horrible, actually. So that was sort of annoying. Thanks, but no thanks. I guess I could play some of it, but it's just this, Sean Carroll doesn't say anything about the evidence. He just talks about this abstraction that somehow it works for him. Well, it doesn't work for me. All right, so anyway. Pot-smoking atheist. It's not a, whatever. This whole trivial activity, it's like itch-scratching atheist or, nose-picking atheist, I don't know, foot-tickling atheist. Really, you just could say just jerking off atheist, right? Smoking pot is just a silly recreation. Mostly silly, frankly. And it's just, alcoholic atheist. I mean, the fact that you're going through your life kind of dependent on having this, um, cheap entertainment every now and then is kind of a defect. It really isn't something to be proud of. It's sort of an example that you really can't get, you know, you, you really, and it's not like it's a brain enhancer. Let's get serious. Come on. I've done enough pot to know. Okay, it doesn't make you any smarter. It makes you dumber. Okay, it makes it all easier because you are so lost in. Oh, I could just, you could just stare at the little holes in the sponge. And it's interesting. You can't handle anything too complicated. The simpler the better. So it's really doesn't say much, in terms of a title. I'm just saying to somebody who's smart enough to know it's just a wanking aid. It doesn't have anything to do with being real in the real world. Anyway, I just it's just people wearing this kind of crap on their sleeve just doesn't make any sense to me. Sorry. Which video do you have, E, that best explains the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment? Question mark. So here I'm explaining something like the two-slit experiment, explaining how they've got it completely wrong. I mean, not a single assertion they're making can be backed up with anything called evidence, and it's so it's strange, bizarre. It breaks all the rules. I mean, it's just too stupid. And you want to talk about an experiment that's, technically just a bunch of added catches, a lot of catches, because you've added all these qualifications to how something's going to be done. And you're going to say that, no, if you defeat that experiment, then you've accomplished something. No, I've taken the cornerstone and pulled it out. I don't, the stuff built on top of that is all going to fall on its own weight easy enough. But anyway, I'll talk about it. It seems clear they are mucking with their data sets. So I don't know if they're mucking with a data set. Their assumptions are ludicrous. So that's where it all falls apart, is they've made all these assumptions about what's going in. So yeah, they have no idea what they're measuring at the out, because they think there are only 2 light point sources at the prism. Yes, well, that's clearly idiotic of them. Okay. It is off to one side, breaking the pattern. Seems clear their error is their data, and was hoping to get your explanation. Well, I don't think the data, is broken. I think clearly all these assumptions about what they're sending in is broken. So you could just start with the beginning. This gets into, there's lots of different ways they can do it. It gets into interferometers and all of this, reflecting light all over the place, and all the distances have to be the same. But the premise is they're going to create a double entanglement. It's essentially what they're relying on. And by creating double entanglement, they have a entangled pair they can dispose of to find out what the other entangled bit is, and then compare those 2 bits based on destroying their partners. So they can destroy the partners, and they can know something about the undestroyed elements of the photons that weren't destroyed. And yeah, but it's so convoluted and stupid. But it starts off all wrong. I mean, it starts off with this stupid 2-slit premise, right? So they create 2 slits, and they don't shoot the pattern somewhere, right? They don't sit there and rely on the 2-slit to create these angles, right? So the only thing the 2-slit is creating that's all interesting is this, right? This and this. Okay, that's all right on this surface. This tiny percentage of the light that goes here and here and here and here is the only stuff relevant. All the light that goes through is totally uninteresting, because it just goes straight through. No, sorry. I mean, it's just so stupid. Okay. So this isn't about which slit it went through and all this kind of crap. No, it's about this. It's about the fact that the light bends, it deflects. Okay, as it travels by the surface, it hits electrons, and it's deflected. It's scattered to all the locations. Okay, just random each time. It goes to a different location depending exactly how close or far from the slit it is, all that kind of crap. how many electrons it hits. It'll decide which way it's going to scatter, and it just scatters. And then you just recombine photons. So all this light doesn't have anything to do with the two-slit pattern. All the light going through the middle has nothing to do with it, okay? So this goes back to a Feynman miscalculation, misunderstanding. The light going through the center isn't doing any probabilistic wave function nonsense. There's no wave function happening to that. And you can see it in the single slit because, you know, in the single slit, you have this obvious thing where the light, the pattern here gets so bright. And why is it so bright in the middle? Oh, that's because the light just shot right straight through, obviously. I mean, it's so obvious. All right, so they start the experiment with this silly notion that, so this is what they're assuming before they even start the experiment. So I don't have to go through all the mirrors and all the crap. You can just understand that they have it wrong, so wrong from the beginning that you might as well just forget about it. It doesn't mean anything. So they start off with the idea that they're going to send a single photon. Okay, so as I just pointed out, we can't make single photons. There's no theory explaining how we make a single photon. So even if we've made a small amount of photons, we know that, you know, for every photon I make partner photons, you know, partner pairs are going to be in the clumps because the electron is pushing more than just one little tiny piece of energy. The electron has a size, and when it moves, it hits more than one piece of energy as it moves. And so it's clumping energy. And so there's a clump here, and a clump here, and a clump here at the timed levels. Well, anyway. So what's going in is never one photon, and even for this slit thing to mean anything, we know that, well, a photon has to be going here, and it has to be going here, and it has to be going here, and it has to be going here. That photons have to actually be hitting all these surfaces for you to create the actual double slit experiment pattern. If you don't have enough photons going in, you're not going to have any pattern coming out. So that's another fact. You have to have enough pieces to make a photon. Anyway, so it starts off with this notion that somehow this is the further notion, right? Their notion is that a single photon, okay, so if I just drew it as a wave or this, it doesn't really matter, right? They're just saying a single thing comes into here and it splits into two things. So they've already have this assumption that they took one thing, all right, and somehow it made two things. So now there's two photons. So I had one photon, and now I have two photons because of the slits. So they think that's what the two-slit is doing, is creating two photons. It's based on their stupid two-wave theory. Now, we know that doesn't work. So mathematically, we know it should be four photons, right? We know that there's the math that works understands there's four vectors, four vectors, four vectors, four vectors, four vectors. That works, that math. Two vectors from here doesn't work. So we already know they have a silly assumption, and they haven't even appreciated that the double slit experiment proves, okay, the proof is in the math. The math that works has 4 point sources. So obviously you have to have 4 sources of photons. So it wouldn't be 2 photons being created by the slits, it would be 4 photons, right? So they can't even get that part right. And it's still based on the idea that they made the 4 out of one photon. One photon went in and it made 4 photons. So now we're really getting silly, right? Because now we've got 4 photons in this experiment, and you know, from 1. All right. And so, but yes, obviously when they're doing it, their assumption is there's just 2. So I won't go with what they should know, okay, which is 4 works, 2 doesn't. Okay, but let's just say, so there's 2 by their silly logic. Now, they're not sitting there and casting these to create an interference pattern over here and take advantage of the two-slit experiment. No, they're just saying, okay, I made 2 slits, and now I'm going to put a crystal right here. Okay, so we know the patterns being created on the surfaces by, you know, doing all these angles. Well, you can't do any of these angles into this crystal. So all the crystal's doing is just blocking, and they're really thinking that this 2 slits created a single photon, now it created 2 entangled photons. So now there's an entangled photon coming out of here and an entangled photon coming out of here. And now, okay, the crystal's magic is that the crystal takes, they put in really high, you know, ultraviolet, let's say 250 nanometer photon. So they put that in, and the crystal produces 2, 500s, right? So you put a 250 in, you get two 500s out. Okay, now that's sort of logical, so that everybody can sort of, yeah, that makes sort of sense. And the trick will be is now we have two more entanglements, right? So now we have the entangled product of the slit, right? They're claiming these two photons are entangled because they were created out of one photon. All right, and now this is going to create one that goes this way, and one goes this way, and one that goes this way, and one goes this way, right? So now we got double entanglement. So now we have the entangled, this entangled photon is now double entangled because now it's created two new photons that themselves are entangled. So we went from one photon, now we have four photons, right? So then they take these two and let them go through some mirrors, and then they take these two and let them go through some mirrors and crap. And then they try to recombine them, right? So they find out what this one is because they terminate it. And that should be the same as this one, right? So they find out what this one is, and that tells them everything they need to know about these. But if they know that information, they get no pattern. And somehow if they don't terminate these, they get a pattern or some other kind of crap. But there's no point in going all the way down that far into the experiment when you know these assumptions are wrong. I mean, they're silly. Photons aren't entangled because they go through slits. They don't break into two and go through both slits. None of that stuff is the truth. So the whole thing starts off with assumptions that are so stupid and silly. And they're just plain wrong. I mean, they're wrong assumptions, and they can be proven to be wrong. It's not how the thing works. And so why would you even bother with their results? Because the results are based on these silly notions that these things are entangled by some process, and they're not entangled. The only thing that happens in here, when you do this conversion and you create the two photons are just as I move this forward, I'm creating an opposite photon in the opposite direction. When I move this way, what I've done is moved away from the opposite direction. So you can sort of understand when I'm sending photons in different directions, it's likely a consequence that I have I'm catching the reflection of the movement, the opposite side of the movement, in the process of doing that. And clearly you could also say if I'm going from 250 to 500, what I've done is I've taken, this is sort of so obvious, even an idiot could understand, right? So I'm taking something that's this, like this. I'm putting it into something, and what really is going to happen is this piece will go this way, this piece will go that way, this piece will go this way, this piece will go that way. This is 500 nanometers now. This is 500 nanometers now. I mean, it's just so obvious. And so these two would be out of phase with each other, right? This would be the phase of this photon. This would be the phase of this photon. So they're 180, they're 90 degrees out of phase. So it's the same thing as this, right? If I go forward here, I created an absence on the other side, and then when I go back, I create a pressure this way and an absence towards you. So it's, anytime something moves in a direction, it's really creating two effects. It's creating more reflection in this direction, and it's creating less reflections in the other direction. And this is doing the same thing. Like I said, it's just creating two. It's taking this and just taking, shoot one bit this way, shoot the next bit that way, shoot this way, shoot that way. And because every photon doesn't do it, it just sometimes turns out that way. Sometimes it shoots them all this way, sometimes it shoots them all that way. It's just that 1 out of 5 times or whatever, it will do exactly this. It'll shoot one this way, one that way, one this way, one that way, and create two photons out of one photon, two photons of a new frequency. That's the sensible theory, the logical theory. I mean, all of this, whoa, it's just, so bad. Alright, so I can't really say anything else, right? This is theory. We're all sitting here with the same evidence, and you want to sit there and make the, you want to put all the facts together, find out everything that something does, find out all the ways it does it, pick at it as much as you can to figure out how it works. And instead of doing all of that, They're just jumping the evidence. They're just jumping way too fast. So again, I can use just the cliche example for me is going to be the Pharaoh cell. I mean, look it up if you don't know what one is. Because yes, it gives you this illusion. It says something to you overtly. And if you pay attention to what it's overtly saying, you're going to get all kinds of wrong answers. So you have to dissect it. You have to look a little deeper, and then you figure out, oh, you know, it's fooling me. Okay? And again, this isn't even that complicated. Look how bad, you know, imagine if the Pharaoh cell was dumped into their hands 200 years ago, what kind of mess they would have made. Because they couldn't figure out that an on-off pattern doesn't automatically mean wave interference. It's the simplest pattern in the universe. You're going to find lots of things that can create on-off, on-off, on-off. And if you make these silly assumptions that it means this, you know, you jump to these wacky conclusions. Okay, well, the phenomenon seems to be coming out of the two slits, but only one thing went in, so it must have split in two. I mean, you can't do stupid mistakes like that and call yourself a good scientist. I mean, it's just so bad that they jump to such extraordinary explanations when they didn't really test the ordinary ones. And it's just sort of, you know, that they had a real eagerness to make the story more interesting, you know. Just as, and I have the opposite impulse. I'm not looking for an interesting story. I'm looking for the truth. And this doesn't smell, their stories don't smell anything like it. Bent space? Oh, come on. Time dimensions that don't follow any of the rules of a dimension, yet you're going to call it a dimension? I mean, these violations of reason and logic are just so overt. And for all of you to just be such, you know, to be so resistant to accepting that, oh, okay, they're humans and they fucked up. Yeah, that's all that happened. They're humans and they screwed up by kind of a classic failure, you know, of aggrandizing stories, which everybody seems to want to do. Make it bigger than it is. Gild lilies all over the place. You know, just keep doing the Borgie, you know, buck up kind of nonsense, the stoic nonsense, all of the lies the world tells, you know, to keep people in place. It's just, ugh. All right, that's enough. So I hope that's you know, well, it really should be enough. I mean, I have, my interest is in the foundations of physics and showing how there are none. Okay, that the whole thing is a cloud city. Well, physics is just a cloud science. It's up in the clouds. It doesn't have any roots in reality. It's all just now silly stories they tell. They're all silly stories. They're not grounded in anything. You can't find where did this story come from. You know, like Hansel and Gretel, you could say, where did that bullshit come from? Gingerbread, witches, and ovens, and what the hell is any of this made? What's the rational reference for these stories? You can't find them. And that's how distant physics has gotten from reality. They're just way off, you know, in so disconnected that you just can't find the metaphor even. Three Pigs still has some kind of metaphor, right? I mean, they're pigs and houses and wolves that blow stuff down, but I mean, you know, with a lot of, you know, big lung capacity. But there's a connection with this whole idea of do it right the first time kind of thing, and so there's, you know, something to the story. But some of these fables have no connection to reality anymore. They're so distant. They've been told so badly so many times, and there's no connection at all. So anyway, that's all I can do. Look, I'm just saying. I've the 3 videos in the on the website and in the subject playlist. 3 important videos. What is a photon? What is gravity? And what is energy? And those just blow up, you know, any notion that physics cares at all about the truth. Okay, they want a different story than the truth tells. Clearly, And they have to want it because it is on its face obnoxious to the senses. You know, bent space controlling the universe. What the fuck, bent space? What the hell is that? It's not an answer to the question. It's negating the question. It's just saying, say anything, bent anything. I could say bent mapo. I could say bent tree bark. I can just say anything that's invisible. Right? It doesn't have to be space, right? I could use bent ether, bent whatever. Geodesic is what they say, right? So, I mean, just too stupid. It's too stupid. Yeah, there's just no point. I just thought it. So, well, anyway, I mean, all I can do is reason, and if I can't reasonable back, that's the way things are. Live in a world full of unreasonable people. Just seems to be kind of overtly in your face fact. Yeah, it's just sad. But anyway, till the next time, and I can only do my half of this, and that's it. I mean, I did, these flat Earth debunkers who, won't for $2,000. They're too afraid to debunk me for $2,000. They had some little assembly, the little live room, and just a complete waste of anybody with a brain. And you're just saying, why do people gravitate to this superficial, silly science? Just making fun of flat earthers. Why is that entertaining? It's just sad. So anyway. Shit. Yeah. So, I guess I should do this. So this has been a DraftScience video presentation. D. Hilster should be up soon. No point in watching. I would play the video live, but I'd have to go through all the boring 20 minutes of where he just talks about the John Chappelle Society over and over again. Ugh, God. The 20-minute intro. The redundant 20 minutes. Ugh. So yeah, we're not doing that. So anyway, this has been a Draft Physics and Science video presentation.